Hi, everyone. We're just going to wait till more people enter the room.
While you're entering, please feel free to use the chat. Let us know where you're coming from, what territory you're on. Say hello. I'm always happy to know who we're talking with. Nice to see we've got people from Lindsay, KW, Toronto, of course, Hamilton, Oakville. I'm in Stratford today, where I moved during COVID. So I hope to welcome a bunch of you to Stratford this season to see an amazing season. That's my plug for Stratford. Done. Check.
Okay, we're going to get going here. Welcome, everyone. Thanks so much for being here and joining us for the sixth module in our Social Purpose Real Estate for Art Spaces series. We're thrilled to welcome you back or welcome you for the very first time. My name is Bruce Pitkin, and I'm the Executive Director of Arts Build Ontario. Arts Build Ontario, ABO, is a nonprofit organization dedicated to supporting the development and sustainability of creative spaces across the province. We provide tools, training, and resources to help arts organizations plan, manage, and finance the spaces they need to thrive. Our work centers on strengthening the infrastructure behind the arts so artists and organizations can focus on what they do best, creating and engaging communities. Today, we're happy to say we are joined by Kendra Fye of Creative Collisions and two senior cultural affairs officers with the City of Toronto's Economic Development and Culture Division, Dan Godin and Erika Hennebury. Our conversation today will leave you with the information on the planning and development systems in Ontario and Toronto, how to apply for city-owned or below-market spaces, and how this can be applied across other municipalities. Following the presentation, we'll wrap things up with a Q&A, so please feel free to submit your questions in the Q&A box at any point during the session, and we'll make time to get to them at the end. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that Arts Build Ontario operates out of 44 Gaukel Creative Workspace, a settler-built space on the traditional territory of the Anishinaabeg, Anishinaabe, and the Haudenosaunee peoples. We're located in what is now Kitchener, Ontario, on the Haldimand Tract, land that was promised to the Six Nations of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy and extends 6 miles on either side of the Grand River. As an organization committed to supporting arts facilities and creative spaces, we acknowledge that these spaces are not defined solely by colonial infrastructure, and that creative spaces include the land itself. If this is your first time joining us, welcome. SPRE for Art Spaces is a 3-year initiative that explores the pressing issues, needs, and creative responses surrounding social purpose real estate in the arts sector. This work is made possible thanks to the dedicated partners and advisory committees, including Toronto Arts Council, City of Toronto, Toronto Metropolitan University, Infrastructure Institute of U of T's School of Cities, U's Cultural Policy Hub, and Creative Collisions. We are also grateful for support from the Department of Canadian Heritage. You can find more information about our ongoing projects and programs on our website. We're pleased to have Kendra Fye with us today. Kendra is the lead consultant on the SPRE for Art Spaces project and a long-standing collaborator with the ABO. Kendra, she/her, is a cross-sector leader committed to revitalizing faith and heritage spaces through initiatives that support the common good, like affordability housing, arts hubs, and food security programs. With a background in theater and music, Kendra also works to explore dynamic opportunities to enhance affordable housing in Lakeshore and also Stratford, Ontario. I'm now handing it over to Kendra to take us through the session and the Q&A. Kendra.
Yeah, thanks so much, Bruce. Hello, everyone. It's so great to be here with you and to see all the wide variety of places that you come from and lots of familiar names there. So happy to think of you all in your places on a slightly warmer day, at least in Stratford, than it's been for a while. Few quick notes before we dive in. We know this is happening over lunch, so feel free to eat your lunch while you're listening to us. Use the chat to share your thoughts and reflections as we go. That's kind of the informal aspect of it. If you have questions, you can put them in the Q&A feature as well. So we'll revisit those either at the end of the session or as we go through each case study, depending upon what kind of question it is. If you have any access needs, drop a note in the chat and ABO staff will be happy to assist. The session's being recorded and it will be available on the website, and the presentation slides will be shared after in both English and French. All right, on to introducing our lovely folks today, long-term collaborators with ABO and with myself. So we're excited to welcome our speakers for SPRE 106, Unlocking Cultural Space, Planning and Development Resources and Strategies. Erika Hennebury, Erika, is a Senior Cultural Affairs Advisor with the City of Toronto's Economic Development and Culture Division. Erika is co-lead for the City of Toronto's Office for Cultural Space, where she works on policy planning, program development, and capital projects related to cultural infrastructure. Her work at the city has included capital partnerships such as the Blackhurst Cultural Centre, cultural hubs such as 32 Lisgar Creative and Cultural Hub, and the development of a cultural districts program. That's Erika. Dan Godin is a Senior Cultural Affairs Officer in the City of Toronto's Economic Development and Culture Division, where he specializes in planning for cultural spaces through the development and planning processes. His work includes leading a citywide cultural infrastructure study for the City of Toronto, managing a property tax incentive program for cultural spaces and venues, and coordinating development review work that delivers community and cultural spaces across the city. Dan brings practical experience navigating complex planning applications, facilitating cross-divisional partnerships, and designing policy frameworks that help cultural organizations access and maintain space. So we are all very lucky to have two unicorns here today, people who understand the arts and have experience in the arts and also understand planning. And that is a unique series of skills that we're super happy to have. Erika and Dan, we're so glad to have you. Over to you.
I will just share here and then pass it to Erika.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. And thanks, Bruce and Kendra, for the intro. We're really happy to be here with you today. We want to tell you a little bit about the work that we do with the City of Toronto and a little bit about some of the projects that we're working on. Then there'll be lots of time for questions after. So yeah, I guess we'll sort of gather some questions as we go. And please feel free, Kendra, to jump in with questions as we're talking. If you see things that are related to particular projects that we're describing and you wanna, ask a question in the middle of it, that's cool. Or you can save them to the end. It's up to you. And I know you'll be harvesting the questions from the chat here. So yeah, feel free to interrupt us anytime. Okay, so we are... Dan and I are the co-leads for the city's Office for Cultural Space. And we are situated within the city's Economic Development and Cultural Division in a team called Cultural Partnerships, where we work really closely with our manager, Ben McIntosh. We also have a team member who's on mat leave right now, Mojan Janfar. We'll probably mention her as we go a little bit because she also has done a lot of heavy lifting for the city's Office for Cultural Space, including the culture plan. That small project, that massive, massive, amazing project. This office launched in 2022. We lead cultural planning and policy initiatives such as the Culture Plan, which is called Culture Connects. I really recommend that you read it. It's incredible. It's really visionary document. Really, really amazing work by many, many different people within economic development and culture, as well as our consultants, Monumental, who did the community consultation. So our team leads development of different types of programs, such as the Cultural Districts Program, which I won't really talk a lot about today, but it's a new kind of forthcoming project that we're working on. We lead capital projects, and we manage a portfolio of city-owned cultural spaces under the community space tenancy policy, which is the key policy we use to lease city-owned spaces to not-for-profit organizations for nominal rent, which basically means no rent. You have to pay the operating costs, but you don't pay rent. That's a really great program. If you're interested in space, please just look up community space tenancy, and you can find out more about free space. So we also have different kinds of partnership initiatives that we do, like this one with Arts Build Ontario. We also Dan manages the Creative Co-location Facilities Property Tax Subclass program, which allows 50% property tax rebate for qualified organizations. And then we also just provide a one-window approach for artists and arts organizations who are looking for space. So you can always reach out to us. We'll share our emails later, but creativespace@toronto.ca also gets to us. So then the next slide, I think, is just a couple of the tools, the key tools that we use. As I mentioned, the community space tenancy program is the key one that we use that allows us to enter into below market lease agreements. We have a big portfolio of these spaces across the city, and it's a really great program. We also use, and Dan will dive into this a little bit more next, but we use community benefits, through the planning and development process to secure community space, cultural spaces. And we also engage in capital projects with their kind of adaptive reuse of heritage properties and things like that. We have a number of heritage properties, museums, community centers across the city, and cultural spaces. And we really rely on partnerships with nonprofits to do that work. So yeah, we work on all things cultural infrastructure. And so I'm going to hand it to Dan, who's going to dive into some of the planning legislation framework.
Yes, so I am going to run everyone through Ontario's planning system in 5 minutes or less, and I'll do the best I can here. I think it's important to understand sort of the core components of the planning system in Ontario to give you a bit of context for the slides that will follow here, where we'll actually be talking about specific case studies. So these are all the tools and policy layers that shape basically every development decision that happens in the province. So first up at the top there is the Planning Act. So that's the provincial legislation that sets the legal foundation for planning in the province. It really sets out the rules, processes, and authority that municipalities have to follow. And everything, all development in the province has to comply with the Planning Act. So the next layer down is what we call provincial policy statements. And then when it comes to planning, that means the relatively new provincial planning statement is what it's called. So that provides more specific policy direction on land use matters. So all the things like housing, economic development, environmental protection, and infrastructure planning. So the next layer down is provincial plans. So these are region-specific or potentially context-specific things. So these are plans related to environmental conservation, growth management, things like that. And they're usually area specific, so they don't apply everywhere or to every municipality or even to every instance of development. But the next layer down, the municipal official plan needs to follow or needs to comply with what's in provincial plans as well. So the next layer is kind of where we start, really, these are the layers that really matter to us here. In my mind. So the first one is, of course, municipal official plans. So every municipality creates its own official plan, and that's the long-term vision for how the city will grow. It's adopted by council, and it guides decisions on local land use, intensification, transportation, and community infrastructure. So a couple notes here. There is another line between provincial policy statements and the official plan. The provincial policy statement or the provincial planning statement directly guides what happens in municipal official plans as well. So all municipal official plans need to be consistent with policy statements. And so if you're a planner, maybe that language actually matters, or a lawyer, but it's slightly different than comply with. So there's a bit more room, I guess, for interpretation, but you need to ensure that, whatever happens in an official plan or changes to an official plan shows consistency with the provincial planning statement. Actually, before I get into zoning bylaws, I'll also note that there are, a lot of people might be familiar with what's called secondary plans. And so those are area specific plans, but those, fall under the category of municipal official plans. So they're usually a chapter in a municipal official plan, but those are the, the plans for a downtown area or a particular neighborhood within a municipality. And then another layer, of course, that I won't get into a lot of detail here, is that in Ontario, we have a tiered planning system. And so there are, municipalities that are single tier. So Toronto is one of those, where, we have our official plan and that's it. Whereas others, so York Region, for example, has multiple tiers. So there's upper tier and lower tier. And that just means that there are certain things that the region is responsible for. So York Region would be responsible for. And then, there are other things that Vaughan or Markham or Richmond Hill would be responsible for. And so in that case, the lower tier needs to comply with the upper tier and then, work your way up the hierarchy again. And then finally, we've got zoning bylaws. So those are the tool that we implement the official plan with on a site-specific basis. They regulate things like what can be built, where it can be located, what kind of uses you can have within, the height, the density, the parking, the built form, all of those things are regulated by zoning bylaws. So this has the most sort of direct impact on development applications and the use of space. But ultimately, all these layers are meant to work together. The province sets the direction, municipalities take that and translate it into long-term plans for the municipality. And then zoning bylaws really take that and make it enforceable on the ground. I will pause there if anyone has questions before we jump into the next. I can't see them, so they'll let me know.
Yeah, no problem, Dan. So there is a question from Michael Trent from Metcalf. This is probably not precisely the moment where you want to put it into play, but I know people do have questions about this, which is the transition from Section 37 to community benefits. I mean, maybe you can talk about it in relation to the province, but there might be a place later in your presentation that's best for that.
Great question. There definitely is a place. So we will show it like through case studies. We have one of the earlier case studies you'll see talks about the old Section 37 or density bonusing, and we have another one later that talks about the new system. So you'll get a side-by-side comparison right here. So really the rest of this presentation we'll be running through a series of case studies. So showing all the wide range of tools that we use to make culture space happen in the city. I think there's a few really common themes among them. One is that really there's no set of rules. There's no or set of tools or kind of one size fits all approach. Each one of these is fairly complex, at least in Toronto's context, because it's always a redevelopment of in an existing context. I don't think we have any greenfield here. And so it's using a lot of tools and sort of it needs a creative approach and to understand sort of what tools or advocacy or other things do you need to pull in to make something happen. I think another common element with almost all of these is that they had a nonprofit organization or an organization with or community group with a vision really advocating and pushing it forward and advocating for the need because it's not purely technical, it's not purely planning, as I'm sure everyone knows. Politics get in there pretty quickly. And so if there is someone really with a vision pushing for it, that really translates to success and really enables staff to push things forward. So
Dan, I'll just interrupt for 1 second and ask, we had a question, will all of the case studies be specifically not-for-profit based, or will you be covering any for-profit spaces in the context today?
Not covering for-profit, although the themes can, and feel free to bring up the questions later, the themes will apply a lot of the time, like so things like zoning or official plan or we will bring up issues. Our office deals in large part with not-for-profit spaces and enabling that, but not exclusively. So, I mean, if you have, from the for-profit sector questions, we're happy to answer those as we go. But, these case studies are all sort of work that we have been involved in the office. Yeah, so there's kind of a pattern through these. We'll first describe sort of what the space is, and then afterwards we'll outline some of the specific planning tools that made it happen. And with that, I'll pass it over to Erika.
Okay, cool. Dan, can you hold the mic out a little bit from your shirt?
Yes. Is it doing the thing?
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. The first one we're going to dive into is Blackhurst Cultural Center. And to give you a little bit of background, Blackhurst Cultural Center started off as a different book list bookstore, which had been established in the Mirvish Village in 1995 in a storefront there. And so when in 2017, the whole redevelopment of the Mirvish Village was initiated, a different book list lost their space. And so they worked really closely with the city, especially through the councillor at the time, and also with the developer. They got them a temporary space across the street where they're still there doing most of their programming. And we worked really closely with them we worked with the developer through the former density bonusing Section 37 of the Planning Act to secure community benefits within the development. But it was kind of wild the way this all kind of unfolded, and we'll talk you through the components of it in a moment. But yeah, basically to secure a space within the Mirvish Village, and then supported a different book list to basically launch their new nonprofit, which is Blackhurst Cultural Center. So the idea is that they will, where they are in the process of building right now, shovels are in the ground, which is unbelievable. It's been such an amazing thing to work on. But yeah, the Blackhurst Cultural Center will provide permanent, affordable, accessible, and net zero community cultural space. So that they're celebrating the art of Canadians of African and Caribbean descent. This is really led by a long-time leadership of a different book list, Aita Sadu, and her many incredible board members and the team there, as well as their lead architect. And for architecture, just an incredible team of people. So we're going to sort of dive into some of the details of this on the next slide. And you might have questions, and if you do, that's cool. Dan, okay. I tag you.
Okay, here we are, Section 37. So this is old Section 37, or before the province changed it. So, I mean, that was a major factor in making this space possible, was the use of that density bonusing tool. In this case, it was $1 million in Section 37 funds helped support this development here. So the old Section 37 allowed municipalities basically to negotiate community benefits, including cultural space, in exchange for additional height and density. It was, in a lot of ways, a very powerful tool, but the outcomes of Section 37 negotiations could be really unpredictable and uneven. It depends on the councillor involved, the councillor's interests, the team reviewing the application, the interest of the applicant, the area of the city. It really distributed these benefits in areas where there's a lot of development interests. So, communities that need space weren't necessarily the places getting the space through the system. So, it is a loss in some ways that we don't have the same tool, but there were challenges with it as well. Sorry. Okay. City contributions were also key in this case. One of the things the city did was sell the city-owned Honest Ed's Laneway that was within the site, and that allowed the city to acquire the building for Blackhurst and provide a cash contribution for the project. And so they now operate under Blackhurst now operates under a 49-year nominal net ground lease. So that's one of those very low rent leases for them. And that really reduces the financial barriers for the project. And then also behind the scenes, city staff, through an interdivisional working group, provided a lot of the technical support, just understanding how to navigate the system to make this space happen. And then this isn't so much a tool, but it's a thing that we think about all the time. And something we're struggling with is mitigating displacement. So displacement through redevelopment, anyone who works in not-for-profit probably knows, It's a critical concern for culture space. And this case is a clear example of that. When redevelopment happens, planners really have fairly limited tools to require that the space be replaced. So it often takes a pretty concerted, coordinated community effort to make it happen. In this case, you had a local councillor on board, the community, the developer was amenable and open to making sure that Blackhurst had a home here. So, everybody kind of working towards that shared goal really made this, Blackhurst a success here. And I think what we might do is just pause between case studies for questions if anyone has specific questions about this case study before we move on to the next. Otherwise, we can jump in at the end.
We haven't had any questions yet, but I will watch the chat here and see what's what. Thanks so much for covering the Section 37 and the CBCs. I know we had all come to rely a little bit on that. There's a question from Matt Welsh. Can you expand more on the divisional work group? Were these city workers assigned to the specific project or community partners?
Yeah, for sure. So this is a team that I've been leading for the past 4 years. And essentially, because economic development and culture is sort of the lead division on this project, but we also work with a number of different other city divisions. We work with corporate real estate management. We work with our legal, department. We work with social development. We worked actually quite closely with the zoning examiner for this particular project because we had to do a bit of a scoped site plan approval process just to make it very, there were a number of different sort of really creative solutions to really challenging problems that we had to come up with. So it was really important for us to have city planning at the table and the zoning examiner and all of the people who deal with permitting and the various different sort of issues that we faced. And then we work very closely with Aita and her team and with the architect who really helped to sort of navigate from the nonprofit's perspective and navigate a lot of the permitting issues and barriers. So we really kind of brought a number of experts to the table, and it created this kind of technical advisory that would help me in my work, but also to really help Blackhurst as they navigate all of the things. And so that was a really effective, I think that was a really effective working process. And one of the things we came to was obviously this scoped SPA that we worked on, but also these various, being able to waive some of the permit and site plan fees. That was really important too, to sort of get the costs down. So there's a lot of really complex things that we ran into, but really successful problem solving as a result of this group. So this is an approach we're definitely taking forward to through other projects like 32 Lisgar, which we're working on now.
Yeah, and I think we're already seeing it, Erika, and the work you guys are putting into educating people up front and connecting with them on their things on 32 Lisgar, even if they just end up being educated for the future as opposed to Lisgar. So we had another question there. Christiane Tetro asked, can you briefly explain if there is still a Section 37 and can it still be used for cultural space?
Yes and yes, but it is different. So one of the case studies that we'll be getting to here, we will talk about what the new Section 37 is. It's still Section 37 of the Planning Act, confusingly. So we still call it that, but it's a kind of a different system. But we'll get into the details in a case study. So.
Amazing, thanks. And then I think you've answered this, Erika, the interdivisional working group, you intend to continue to apply it where appropriate when you're working on cultural space projects, yeah?
Absolutely. Interdisciplinary, interdivisional collaboration is so like the kind of the practice of cultural planning is rooted in divisional, interdisciplinary collaboration. So we'll always work that way. Amazing. Thanks, guys. That's all we've got for questions right now.
Okay. 32 Lisgar.
Okay, so 32 Lisgar is a space that was secured by the city through the planning process through the former Section 37 density bonusing provisions. It was part of a larger community benefits package for the West Queen West Triangle redevelopment. It's a very, very large redevelopment project. And part of that was that 48 Able, which was a converted factory that housed over 80 artist live work studios, was purchased and demolished as part of this redevelopment. And that was a huge loss to the arts and cultural community at that time. And so it was really important that the Section 37 community benefits package reflect arts and cultural space, artist live work space, as well as production space. So there was a kind of there were a number of benefits that got secured through that larger package. We're not going to dive into all of that today. Some of it, a little bit of it went to the theater center, which really helped them with an adaptive reuse of a former library, which is now a theater center. It's also a city-owned building. And then this media arts facility called 32 Lisgar was initially designed as a media arts facility. I'm not going to dive into the whole history of this, but there's a very long history here. The initial group that was supposed to take over this space did not end up taking over the space, and it came to city ownership only in 2022. So it was quite a long process to get there. And the space does have some deficiencies. There are a couple of pieces that are unfinished in the space. So the ownership was transferred to the city in 2022. We did an initial RUI at that time. Unfortunately, it was a very tight turnaround for a whole bunch of reasons. And there was some, that, as I said, incomplete capital work. And so it wasn't a successful RUI the first time around. We really learned a lot from this and came back to approach this very differently. So as soon as that process completed, in the meantime, we actually secured some additional Section 37 fund from another underutilized resource near the neighborhood and in the neighborhood, and we're able to apply it to some of the incomplete capital work. So we were able to bring the space up to full AODA and code compliance and deal with a number of things like HVAC commissioning, a bunch of electrical stuff, boring stuff to hear about, but we got a bunch of work done. And then also at the same time, we opened up the building to meanwhile uses. So we decided to do a number of pop-up temporary uses, and that all launched with the 2024 Toronto Biennial of Art, took over the whole facility. It was really amazing, successful. And then since then, we've had a number of different groups temporarily using the space until we figure out this long-term operator through this second RUI process. And what we changed about this one was that we made it a nice, really long, a long RUI process. So we launched in September, and the deadline's actually not until March. So it's almost 5 months between launch and deadline. Gave people a lot of time to think and prepare, to meet each other, to collaborate. We did, instead of just one site tour and one information session, we did 3 site tours and information sessions. And we did a whole bunch of different workshops on different topics like governance and capital projects and property management, as well as like a hands-on workshop on budgeting. So how to do your pro forma, how to do a 5-year cash flow, things like that. So we did a lot of really intensive work with people. We also did a lot of networking to connect people to each other, because it is a really big space and people really do need to collaborate to bring it all together. So the deadline is in March, and we're really hoping to get a great long-term tenant or group of tenants to operate the space. And then we're going to dive into some of the details next.
So just FYI, guys, no problem at all. I'm translating as we go, but REOI, HVAC. So I'm translating as we go.
Right. Thank you. Yes, noted. REOI, request for expressions of interest, HVAC, heating, ventilation, air conditioning, cooling. What? Heating, ventilation?
Yeah, you got it. Heating, ventilation, air conditioning. Yep.
Something else. Sorry for all the acronyms in advance. Okay, Dan.
Okay, let's talk about zoning. So I think, all of these, zoning bylaws applied in each case study, of course, but this seemed like a good instance to, talk in a bit more detail. So zoning, of course, plays, critical role in determining what can happen on any given site. Zoning bylaws, again, implement policy with legally enforceable requirements. So regulating things like use, the lot conditions, building location, built form, all that stuff. For 32 Lisgar specifically, the zoning here allows for charitable institutions, nonprofit institutions, cultural and arts facilities, community services and facilities, or other community or social agency uses acceptable to the city. So sometimes securing these spaces, for-profit or not-for-profit, requires a zoning bylaw amendment if the particular thing that you want to do with a site is not allowed. In this case, the zoning supports that broad range of community serving functions. And there's also, if you're in a municipality, zoning can be used, I don't know what the word is, defensively, I guess, to ensure that, if you want to allow a particular use on it, so say cultural and arts facilities, there's the potential to kind of restrict zoning to that particular use if you don't want it to be, flipped in a few years into, I won't name a particular business, but like into something not arts and culture. Yeah.
Dan, we have a specific question about that, and I'm actually finding I don't understand the language used, so hopefully you can interpret. So with all the development and investment taking place, have you introduced any bylaws such as an agent of change policy? So that's the policy I'm not familiar with, to protect cultural assets going forward, particularly those involving music or activation that might be considered impactful to nearby residents? And I know this connects a bit with Mike Tanner and his work, but
I actually don't know that term for an agent
I
of
don't
change
either.
policy.
So Teresa, if you want to type in there what an agent of change policy is, we'll be happy to talk about that if we figure it out. But Dan, I think you addressed a little bit here. I think that the core question is how can you use your bylaws to help to maintain cultural spaces in the long run?
Yeah, and so zoning bylaws can sort of be used to enable things, so allow specific uses. But typically in a zoning bylaw in Ontario, it has a list of permitted uses. So it's what you're allowed to, and anything else that isn't permitted isn't permitted. So you can't do it on the site. So if you restrict that list to a particular set of things that you want to see happen, sometimes it's not feasible to do that, or you might be challenged on it. But in this case, community cultural use was one of those uses for this site.
And interestingly, Teresa came back and told us that the agent of change principle means whoever is introducing the change is responsible for managing and mitigating its impacts. Typically, noise or other nuisances on existing neighbors or cultural uses. For example, if new housing is built next to an existing music venue, the developer must ensure proper soundproofing so the venue can continue operating without conflict. I remember Mike talking a little bit about the the statements that developers, when they built new things in the music district, in the downtown district, had to have statements saying, "We don't guarantee you perfect quiet." Is that the kind of thing you do, Dan?
So no, but that is that's I think that's a really important issue that other people are working on. So in city planning here, and Mike and the music office are working on, as well as understanding that the thing that draws people to a community, so this active music scene or nightlife, those kinds of things, those create noise, and acknowledging that that almost that can start getting into the next layer down, which is sort of other bylaws and noise bylaws and enforcement and that kind of thing. What we're talking about here in zoning bylaws is very much sort of like what a space can be used for, not necessarily how loud you can be in it or at what times of day. But yeah, that's sort of the next layer after planning, and obviously very important.
Cool. So there's some active chatter about that. So things to think about in the future, and some references to Australia and UK and their agent of change policies, which I'm sure you guys have had a look at, but useful further learnings for everybody. Yeah, for sure.
So I'll just jump to the next tool here again is meanwhile uses. So as Erika mentioned, there's quite a few things that have happened in this space in the meantime before we get to kind of a long-term organization. And this really ensures that we activate the space, in the short term. So it's supported a huge range of activations, as Erika mentioned earlier. And this really ensures that we don't just have a dead space, like it's active, accessible, community serving, while we figure out how things are going to work in the long term. And I think this, it can be useful both for private landowners and people like the city. There is advantage if a landowner has redevelopment plans that are happening 2 years, 3 years, 4 years down the line. it's often in their interest to activate that space, and they might not have a hard time finding a long-term tenant for the space, but there are often, arts organizations, artists that would be happy to take space in the short term. And then finally, again, community advocacy was really important here. The development at 32 Lisgar displaced, I think, about 80 artists live work units at 48 Able. And so that displacement, of course, galvanized the community. A group organized of local residents and stakeholders to advocate for more nonprofit arts and culture space to replace what had been lost here. So it really shows, again, sort of how the community recognizing these things in combination with staff at the city level that can understand, where the tools and help them understand what the pressure points and the tools that can be used to, push space forward are. And again, I'll pause here if there's specific questions about this one. Otherwise, I'll move to the next one.
Are some specific questions. I'm just trying to figure out if they're about this one. There's one going back to the Blackhurst Cultural Center and about the measurement of net zero. How was that measured? And this may be too technical. I don't know if you guys were involved in this. The question is were existing spaces of that project considered part of the equation of the net zero or only new build?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I certainly can't get into the architectural details of LEED and net zero and all that stuff. But the one thing, this was actually a really interesting development that resulted in a really creative solution. And so one of the key things we discovered once the city acquired the property that we bought from the developer, which was one of the remaining Edwardian heritage designated properties, heritage listed, actually not designated, that we discovered once the architect started to get deeper into their feasibility studies, they discovered that the capacity, the load-bearing capacity of the upper floors of the building was not going to be adequate to have an arts and cultural center. It was really only designed for very low capacity residential. And so that really kind of gave everyone pause, because I think initially going in, the thought was that this was just going to be a minor renovation actually to this building, and it should be functional. But in fact, it really needed to be completely demolished and rebuilt. And so that jumped the cost from what is initially, projected at maybe $600,000 for basic reno to $15 million. So what that presented was, this huge kind of moment of crisis of like, how are we going to raise all this money? How is Blackhurst going to raise all of this money? And then this opportunity presented itself, which was the Green and Inclusive Community Buildings Fund. And the requirement for that fund was that you achieve net zero. And the other complication of all of this was that heritage listing, that heritage component and heritage preservation. Those two things came together when the architect came up with this really creative solution, which was to preserve the facade of the building. So not only will that make the heritage planners happy, but also it actually allows them to save all of the concrete that they would have had to pour, and with the other components that they're working with in terms of their design, that actually allowed it to achieve net zero, which made them eligible for this huge amount of funding, which they were successful in acquiring. So it all really kind of came together, and all of these crises like really kind of are the birth of like really interesting innovation. So that's how it happened for us.
And that fund was Federation of Canadian Municipalities, Erika, or was that a different green fund?
It's a Government of Canada fund.
Okay. There is also through the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, if you've made an agreement with your municipality, there are several granting funds that are available through them as well on a similar basis. So cool. Okay. So are there recommendations or best practices to bridge a partnership between a new for-profit venue and nonprofits at this level?
That's a really hard one. The reason that's hard, is there's only really two ways the city can enter into, rental agreements for property, lease agreements for property. And one is as below market rent, and it has to be for a not-for-profit. And the other is, full commercial market rent. And so it would be very difficult for those two things to come together in one city-owned property, for instance, if that's kind of the question. So yeah, that's definitely a big challenge.
Amazing.
Not unsolvable, but
Is there a directory or repository of meanwhile spaces that are accessible?
no.
No, but it is. We
I
are
like the
thinking.
face. Everybody's
Yeah.
like, we need to do that. Yeah.
Yeah, no, we are thinking about it. It is one of the actions out of the culture plan actually is to have a meanwhile space program. And it's a great segue because the next one is a meanwhile space that we're going to talk about.
All right, go for it.
But yeah, but we are thinking about it is the short answer, and hopefully doing something about it soon. Okay, I'll
So
pass it
this
to you,
one
Erika.
is It's Okay Studios. And so this was like a really interesting opportunity. Again, this is really so many city divisions coming together to work on something, from economic development to Parks and Rec to city planning, development review, kind of everyone coming together. And the music office was really involved in this as well. So this was essentially this vacant former shoe store that the city had purchased using park acquisition funds, which are a little bit different than other types of property acquisition funds, have to be used in a certain way. Anyway, this was acquired for future parkland. And the parkland was is going to be designed to sort of be part of this affordable housing development at 15 Denison with the lands right behind. So it kind of blends former commercial space, vacant lot, surface parking, and then a former I can't remember what was on that site before. Anyway, this all kind of going to be this big future redevelopment of not-for-profit housing. So this property was identified for demolition and to convert it into a park. But the city knew, and a couple of the park planners actually came up with this proposal and then brought it to the music office, and this all came together in a kind of a wild way. But we're able to realize that this building was actually fairly functional and it would not be demolished for several years. And so it might be an opportunity to explore meanwhile use, which is not something the city typically would do. Meanwhile use is fairly new to us, and it's something we're trying to do. And we're doing it on a case-by-case basis, but we don't have, a whole program for meanwhile use or anything like that. So this is an opportunity to unlock 10,000 square feet over 3 floors for an arts and cultural organization. And so It's Okay. A number of organizations sort of bid for this. It's Okay sort of won this process, and the city was able to contribute some funding for Section 37 to help fit out the space temporarily. They worked with this really amazing architect, Soka, and they were able to convert it in such a creative and super cheap way, knowing that they would only be there a few years. The city was also able to use municipal capital facility designation, which allowed it to be tax exempt. And yeah, so that's sort of It's Okay. And so Dan's going to dive into the details on this one.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, so this is a great example, a very recent example of how meanwhile uses can create affordable space for not-for-profit or, arts and culture groups. Again, they're always temporary, and usually they arise because the site's slated for redevelopment, typically. One of the advantages here is they really come with a reduced kind of administrative burden, and they're meant to sort of be, like as Erika mentioned, It's Okay did a great job with this space, sort of cheap and quick, but looks great. So very creative use of the space. And I think arts orgs and artists are good at doing that kind of thing with space. So it's a good match here. And it just allows them to sort of give them a home and focus on programming rather than sort of trying to establish a space, which there's advantages to that and there's disadvantages, of course. Stability is nice also. The culture plan, again, as I mentioned before, highlights this need to establish a more formal meanwhile space program, because these opportunities come up, and right now we're doing it ad hoc, and I think we'll learn from these experiences with meanwhile spaces. But ultimately, someone in the chat, I think that, you had said, Kendra, that they said, is there somewhere I can look for these spaces? We don't have that. We would love to have that. Just a site you can look at all the spaces available and use them. The city has these, and then I'm sure I'm certain that there's many in sort of the private landowner, development world where there's spaces that are just sitting empty.
And Arts Build Ontario in Kitchener-Waterloo has a Meanwhile Space program that's in action right now. So if you didn't notice that in the chat, Arts Build Ontario is overseeing that right this moment.
That's awesome. Yeah, sorry, I can't see the chat, so I don't see when people say that. But I was actually, we were looking at that, just the other day while I was sort of preparing for this one. It's, I think there is benefit to the landowner, whether it's the city or a private landowner, reducing the carrying costs, not leaving a space just sitting empty, and sort of building up activity and interest in the space. Another thing here, we've mentioned actually on a few of these, but this is typically how we work with not-for-profit organizations, is through nominal leases. So the city charges whatever it is, a symbolic rent, so $1 a year, and then typically the organization is required to take care of anything like fit up, maintenance of the space, operating costs, taxes. So there is not, it's not no cost, but it's, reduced rent, particularly like in a place like, Queen West, it's a huge benefit to not have to pay rent there for a space. Then finally, there's kind of a few things that came together here. Again, as Erika mentioned, the parks and the music office connected in this case, but it really illustrates one way that the city can support DIY organizations and sort of that grassroots that really builds the culture that we see in cities. Many DIY organizations or music groups or whatever it is operate out of spaces that really aren't designed for public assembly or for events, and they might lack necessary approvals or permits. And I'm not suggesting that they shouldn't. Like that's how that kind of whole sphere operates a lot of the time. But in some cases, there are organizations or groups that are just looking for stable space to have these events. And so the Meanwhile spaces are kind of a good middle ground where a group might not want to completely formalize, but it does offer an opportunity to sort of have something stable on the ground. And in this case, it was through a recognition of the space crisis in the music community, particularly in sort of the more grassroots DIY community. We have big venues here, but a lot of the smaller venues, are struggling. And so, the lack of affordable space was identified. And so, beautiful connection between the music office and the work they're doing and parks here, and led to a great opportunity to support one organization. And I will pause again for questions on this one.
Yeah, can you talk about how the office works to ensure the sustainability of existing not-for-profit art spaces, or is your focus on space capital improvement and developing new arts and cultural spaces?
I mean, our scope is pretty specific. Like there's only so much we can do for organizations that are not in city-owned spaces. We can, I think our tools for supporting organizations are really with space. And so if we don't own the space, there's really there are very few ways that we can intervene. I think a lot of times, people ask, they say how come the city couldn't prevent this arts building from being demolished? Or, how come the city couldn't save this group who couldn't afford to pay their commercial rent? Or will the city pay someone's rent because they can't afford it? Things like this. Is like, those are not really things that are going to ever be possible. Those are not really things that we have the funding or reach to be able to intervene in. So we have to really focus on our sphere of, things that we can control and things that we can work within. Means also cities are, we're creatures of the province. Cities are creatures of the province. And so our sort of ability to do things is really limited to things that we're allowed to do by the province. And it's all kind of about delegated authority. And so the things that we're allowed to do are things that city council allows us to do. So it's all about who has the authority over what type of thing. And the one thing that we do have is the ability to get these spaces and then to lease them. So that's really sort of where our kind of biggest impact is. And obviously granting through the Toronto Arts Council is a huge piece of that as well. The granting is also on our team as well. So yeah, there's lots that cities can do, but sometimes we are really limited. And sometimes, yeah, it's really heartbreaking when you see someone who's leasing a commercial space and their 5-year lease is up and their landlord doubles the rent. And there's nothing we can do about that. There are no protections under the Commercial Tenancies Act for commercial tenants once their lease is up. So we're really limited in those types of ways. And then we have a lot of creativity in other ways.
Fair enough. I note that ArtsBuild Ontario has a question that they want to jump in with. ArtsBuild, what's going on?
That was just a glitch. Ignore me.
Okay,
Not
well,
a question.
I was going to draw their attention, actually, the attendees' attention to your website. We've had some fairly complicated questions about varieties of models around large developments and building new art spaces. So I've referred them over to the ArtsBuild Ontario website to have a look at some of the case studies around 221A and Knightwood Tapestry, and we'll be developing some more case studies over time because those are more than we can probably cover in today's conversation. We did have from the city of Mississauga a question about how did the many different city divisions come together to recognize the opportunity for this building? And I'm unclear whether this building is It's Okay or Blackhurst, but I think either. Was it colleagues chatting with each other? Or was it in a more formal way, such as a working group or committee?
It was Jennifer Kowalski, specifically. It was a city planner. Her name is Jennifer Kowalski. She used to work in parks. She's been at a couple different places. When she was at Parks, once Parks acquired that building, she really identified like this would be great for arts and cultural use. And she kind of flagged that. And then, eventually momentum built for that. And so I think, we work together on a lot of different things like, economic development, culture and parks, and planning. We come together in many different touch points over projects and over different kinds of collaborative initiatives that we work on. And so these things come up sometimes and it's like, somebody identifies a property, like, wouldn't this be cool? And then something maybe, we explore it. Sometimes it's not possible for some different reasons. And, sometimes often with these sort of vacant city buildings that get identified, once you do a building condition assessment and you look at it and it's like, oh God, no, like this is not going to be good for anyone. It would cost so much to just make it safe. But sometimes there's something like this where it's like, this is not a really great forever home for anyone, but this could be good with a small amount of investment as a temporary use. So it's sort of how these things come to be. We have a number of panel like tables that we sit around together. Like Dan, maybe if you want to talk about the CBC working group or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess this is a plug for Erika and I, like our office too, is like we kind of play that role a lot of the time is, we are the ones, keeping our ears to the ground for opportunities. And then when they come up, connecting with, the people, across the city organization that might need to be involved to make it happen. And I think that's often the job of a planner is to sort of connect all these threads, whether it's, engineers or real estate folks or, developers and all these people and, identifying where there's opportunities or ideas and making sure that all the things that need to fall into place are there. And you'll probably notice that with this presentation, like it's a huge scattered list of all sorts of different tools that we pull on to make things happen. And as Erika mentioned, we have an internal little working group with people in real estate and legal and in social development that meet on a regular basis just to talk about through the development pipeline what opportunities for community space are coming up, and then amongst ourselves we talk about, does this make sense as sort of more of a socially focused or a culturally focused, so like a social development type space or a community space or some hybrid of the two. And so we're meeting like that regularly, and we have a few little groups like that semi-formally talk about this stuff.
And we work really closely with those social developments community infrastructure unit who have a much larger portfolio of social agency spaces and who have a team of people that have, long time experience of doing these kinds of projects. And so our team, while we're relatively new, we're only 4 years old, like the community infrastructure unit has been around for longer. So we really plug into their work. And then we're also part of the School of Cities social purpose real estate table, which Kendra and Arts Build is as well. So that's another time where we sort of connect with other different even sometimes different divisions of the city, honestly, but lots of people in this practice across the city.
Last question in this section, and then we'll let you go forward. Is this working group open for people to join?
Oh, I'm not exactly sure which working group you're talking about. The social purpose real estate one. I think it's just for practitioners in social purpose real estate space. That's a good question. I'm not sure, but
that one's not open, Erika.
Yeah,
but I think that the timing. I think the timing of the question was in relation to the working group of the city, and I'm assuming.
Oh
that
yeah,
city
no,
staff.
that's just an interdivisional working group of the city that we just sort of strategize and collaborate.
Yeah. Thanks so much, you guys.
I think that group, the results of that work, so that's all very behind the scenes, sort of like very early stages planning and development. But the results come out as REOIs for culture space that you might see, which are posted and open. Okay, I will jump forward here to 221 Sterling.
Okay, so 221 Sterling, folks are probably pretty familiar with this area as it has been home to a lot of repurposed former industrial lands that artists have been working in since the 80s. It's been a really important sort of node of that kind of like former industrial type of cultural use. So there is a big development going in here, and it is going to displace a ton of the groups that are and individuals that are living there right now, unfortunately. But the city planning and development review divisions have been really active in trying to secure as much cultural use and designated live work replacement rentals as possible. So we'll sort of breeze through this one a little bit, but for our team, like we will be getting a 500 actually 5,000 square foot. We put 500 as 5,000. Sorry, that's meters, square meters, 500 square meters, about 5,000 square foot of cultural space in this development. So this is sort of meant to compensate. It doesn't in many ways because people are losing, tens of thousands of square feet, and we're getting something quite a bit smaller back. And although our space will be affordable, I think there's only 10 years of affordability on the live work replacements. Typically, live work does not qualify as part of the city's residential rental replacement. So this was like a really special provision that got put in by the planning team that worked on this. That was really creative and interesting. But yeah, Dan can go into the details of this.
Okay, so we've arrived at the new community benefits charge, which is section 37 still. So this was replaced in 2022. We moved over to the new system as required by the province. So unlike section 37 previously, which allowed sort of the negotiated community benefits that I think a lot of people are probably familiar with, it's now, there's a maximum limit on the value of the contribution, which if anyone wants to know is 4% of the value of the land. So that ends up being quite a bit less than we would have secured under the previous system in terms of value, like the dollar value of the contribution. So, the end result of this is that we have just less ability to secure culture space or just general benefits as a result. There is different approaches to the CBC depending on the municipality. It is up to the municipality whether they want to accept what are called in-kind benefits. So that means actual space instead of a cash contribution. So the city of Toronto, for example, accepts in-kind contributions. But in some places, if the municipality has not elected to do so, it is fairly complicated to accept in-kind benefits for a lot of reasons that maybe we can get into after. But essentially, the city needs to include that in their CBC bylaw, that you allow the acceptance of in-kind spaces. So for Toronto, we do allow that, and this is a case of that. And so we, asked for something to replace the cultural space within, the limits of the community benefits charge in this space. I'll just, because it's a very relevant part of the Ontario planning system, thought this would be a place to throw in the OLT, or formerly known as LPAT or OMB. It's been through a few name changes in the past few years. So this is the tribunal of the province that's responsible for resolving appeals related to land use planning. Decisions that shape developments like this one are often made through something like the OLT or through the OLT. Especially, this will happen where, a council decision on a development is appealed, or when council just doesn't make a decision within the time frame. So these appeals can often be resolved through an offer to settle, which is the case here, and they might include things like negotiated elements, such as the community space. And then finally, Erika hinted at it here, but another tool that we have is rental replacement. I don't think, for cultural space, it's going to be that often that we can use it, but the city does have regulations around the demolition of residential rental, which needs to be replaced. And in this case, it was used for live work units on the site. So a good win there. Yeah, I think I'll stop there if there's questions on this one.
Don't think we have any questions at this moment.
Okay, then we'll move on to like the kind of highest level planning process here.
Yeah, we're at 5 after 1.
Okay, great.
Okay, cool. We're going to burn through this because we want to get time for questions. So Downsview is a really big redevelopment area. There's a secondary plan that was adopted in 2024. It's a massive chunk of land. It's going to be built in phases over 30 years. And this is an opportunity for the city to secure arts and cultural space and embed it in the policy. So let's jump to the next slide and dive into that.
Yeah, because I think one of the questions earlier was kind of around, if I remember correctly, was around sort of like what the city can do sort of at this base level, like in terms of requiring culture space. And so Downsview, being a relatively new one, is a kind of a good example of, us pushing the limits, or trying to, as the city, trying to find within, what we're allowed to do, ways to really push for culture space in new planning areas. So there's we've talked about meanwhile spaces here in Downsview. There's a meanwhile zoning bylaw, which is basically recognizing the fact that this place is going to be built over 30 years, very long time frame, huge redevelopment. And so there's a bylaw in place that allows interim uses on the vacant land, with the recognition that, eventually it will be torn down and something else will be built in its place. But the intent of this policy was really for community amenity and placemaking opportunities. And that includes a lot of non-res uses, including arts and culture space. And there are, in Downsview, like a lot of activations, even in the, like now, and I think going forward, ideally there. And then this is a good example of, using the official plan to support culture space as well. Again, as mentioned earlier, key planning tool for the city. And so this secondary plan lives under the official plan. And they include area-specific policies. So in this case, there's requirements and directions for arts and culture space and community space. Neat thing here is that in every district of Downsview, there's a minimum requirement for community space, which includes cultural space. And so every time they build a district, we are engaged and we talk about sort of what we'd like to see in the district. But again, this is all very long-term and abstract at this point. And nothing's really being built yet. And that is it. I can just, at the end of this, that will be distributed later, we do have a whole slide of just links related to each of these, some resources that you can review later.
Amazing. Thank you so much, you guys. I really appreciate it. I think you guys have done a fantastic job taking us on a little bit of a tour through things here today. Yeah, I will point out to the group that this was quite Toronto-centric because that was what we were looking at on this particular journey today. There were some questions that I thought were interesting. Sorry, someone is trying to call me at the same time, guys. Here we go. There were some questions that I thought were interesting around how we might apply these to a rural context. And I don't want to put you guys on the spot. I mean, I certainly have some thoughts in my other work, but if you have some thoughts on that, I think that that could be helpful.
I mean, I think there are a lot of different things, tools that can be used, planning tools for sure, but also just the idea of just letting artists loose in vacant spaces, I think is the most important thing you can do. And also inviting artists to participate in the government process too, I think is really important. I think there's been so many really interesting projects, and particularly in New York City and a little bit here actually too, where there have been artists in residence in different government divisions. Like we actually had an artist in residence in city waste management for a while, and of course New York has a long history of doing that. I think that that is also an opportunity that could be considered by municipality, or sorry, by rural um, uh, governments, is to invite artists into the process and also just give space for free.
I think great advantage in rural context is it's honestly, the planning system is much less complex as well. And so if you have a great idea for the use of we'll say meanwhile space or like an empty space, the planning rules might be there still, like the zoning and everything. But if you have a willing ear on council or whatever it is, you can sort of, I think, push things through, smaller network of people that you need to coordinate to make these things happen.
Yeah, and certainly I've seen it in my practice, out at Kingsbridge outside of Goddard. I've seen forgiveness of land tax for a cultural center, even though there wasn't like a specific tax code that was for the arts. There was an agreement made for that. I've seen some development charge forgiveness as things are going forward. There's been many interesting things that can be done in these contexts. Someone asked about the contents of slide 16, but I'm going to let you all know that there is that the slide deck will come out after in English and French, so you'll be able to go through it then. And I'm sure if you have follow-up questions that Erika and Dan would be happy to manage any follow-up questions via Arts Build after. Bruce, do you have any questions? Your video is on, which makes me think you might have some thoughts.
No, just coming in at the end here. The one thing I just want to add about the rural circumstance, I know that I've been out in Perth Huron County and done work around in the counties with regard to housing. And a lot of that in the municipalities, it has been incorporated into some community improvement plans, and they look at it as revitalization. So a lot of there's a lot of municipalities who do not have arts and culture plans. And so this is sort of taken, I think, addressed within those contexts. If a municipality has a arts and culture plan, then it's more specific. But it really depends on the municipality that you are working or living in and how they are handling it. But what has been talked about today is that process is still the same in terms of zoning and all those other issues that come up as well.
There was also a question about, meanwhile spaces and the requirements for meanwhile spaces. And I think Dan said it as well. I mean, in Kitchener-Waterloo, Arts Build Ontario has taken that on. But as individual artists, you can choose to reach out to a landowner or building owner and make requests in regards to spaces. You want to make sure that you have your lawyer accompanying you in any agreements you make. And you want to make sure that you are very much notifying your insurance company and checking in on what the costs of insurance might be and being really clear about who will be using the space, when, how they will access it, and who will come and go. I know all of that is super boring, but it is important to protect yourselves as you take on different real estate approaches. So,
yeah, that's real. I think too, if anyone's interested in checking them out, there's a group called Akin Collective that is really expert in this area of figuring out how to work with developers or property owners and get meanwhile spaces and convert them very cheaply, and then move on. And that's really part of their model, and they do a great job of that. I think there's a lot more artist studio providers in other. There aren't a lot of artist studio providers in Canada. There are some in Vancouver. There are very few elsewhere. There are tons. There are like hundreds in London, England. So I find that that's really interesting too. That feels like a bit of a gap in the space. So if anyone wants to do that work, should do it.
Question here. Interested to hear more about Downsview and expanding meanwhile strategies to phase development at master plan scale. And I had referred them, just so you know, to the, I think it's pronounced Workland, but I could be wrong, in Calgary, the former Alberta Theatre Projects, Theatre Calgary redevelopment as well, because that's on quite a grand scale of reimagining too. But Downsview, thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I can talk a little bit more about it. It's it's again, you'll notice in the case studies we went from very concrete to like super abstract. And so, at this scale and at this time with Downsview, it's sort of like we would like 1,000 square meters in this district, and sometimes we don't even know where it is in it, what building it's in, and so. At this point, we're working on very sort of like principles-based approach. So we'll tell the developer, we want it near transit, we want it near open space, we want it, accessible, all of those things. And that's kind of the level of detail we're working at, and eventually when there's actual development applications coming in, so saying like, this is the building we want to build, then we get into a bit more detail about where in the building, what the layout is and all that. But it is interesting, like, in this role, you're working at that level, just basically giving a number and saying somewhere in a good location, to, figuring out how the elevator is going to work on the other end of the spectrum.
Bridget McIntosh, thanks, Bridget, has very helpfully plugged in there that there's SPRE supporting performing arts in rural and remote communities. Yeah, they're a great organization and they're hosting their symposium in May. Absolutely. That's always helpful. I think also, within organizations, like PACT and such, there are often divisions that are dealing more with rural considerations and sub-rural considerations too. I think that might be all the questions. Oh, no, there's something in the Q&A, so I'm just going to go over there. Oh, and Danielle, they, them has referred us to the space project report. Oh yeah, that's the Mass Culture Space Project report. So there's so many great people doing work. Okay, question from Amy Calder from the city of Mississauga. How did the city get that kind of foothold in the Downsview redevelopment project? Was it the developer expressing interest in supporting social and cultural infrastructure, or was it the way the land was zoned?
I could start. So I'll say, like, I wasn't, I'm involved in Downsview now at sort of a implementation level. So, I didn't write the policies that are in place there. I'm very happy that they're there. But like, how did it happen? I think Downsview, given the scale and sort of like of the development, I think there's a lot of interest in doing kind of interesting, innovative things there. And again, this almost goes right back to the advocacy thing, is like, just get people excited about it, and articulate the vision for it, and why it's, why culture really matters to the community. And framing it as a complete community, culture is part of that. I think also there's a mix of sort of Canada Lands is involved there, and so slightly different mandate than a pure for-profit developer. So they have a bit more flexibility in terms of what they can do with the land. Erika, I don't know if you have more experience with Downsview.
No, I'm not on the Downsview. I've never was on the Downsview file, so I'm not in the weeds on that one. But we definitely do have also some cultural space sort of tools that we've been able to secure cultural space through some of the forthcoming like transit oriented communities, like new transit stations like First Parliament or East Harbor. Like, there will also be cultural spaces in those, and they're actually quite big, like quite huge chunks of space. Not till probably long after I'm retired will these things come to fruition, but we do sometimes get to play in these bigger spaces, these sort of like massive redevelopments or brownfield or greenfield redevelopments. So that's always really fun, but also scary because oftentimes they're in really complex, buildings where there's a little bit is owned by, TTC and a little bit of is owned commercially. And it's also a condominium. There's probably a couple condominiums, and it gets really hairy with the shared facilities agreements and easements and cost sharings and all that kind of stuff. So it's great, but it's also a little bit like, oh gosh, where will we be then? Where will we be in 15 or 20 years when the space comes on? What state will arts organizations be in if we are not increasing their funding and supporting them and making sure they're robust over time? So it's really hard to project that far into the future with any confidence in this moment, and that can be really daunting. And that's a piece of our work too.
I think that's quite accurate, Erika. And looking at this, across the nation and various things I've been involved with, I would say that each one has a specificity that is of its time and of its region and of the players at the table. So we look at Stratford right now. We have the Grand Trunk site, which is 18 acres, dead center in the middle of the city, and that process of redeveloping it and what will become community benefit really becomes conversations about who wants to pay for what and who wants to trade what and what benefit might be offered in exchange for things that the city owns, right? And so within a CIP framework, so a community improvement plan framework, there's some room to play with these things, but it can be quite specific to the context of where you are, is my experience.
Yeah, you're stuck between like wanting if you're doing it with a development partner, you need to they need to have it pencil, but also you need to get the most bang for your buck. So you own the land, you have the control over what happens on it, but you also need to deal with for-profit entities, which is always like, kind of a whole other thing.
I spent 2 entire very geeky days at the University of Waterloo a couple of weeks ago trying to figure out how to make a development pay on a piece of land, and it was the hardest thing I have ever done. I was like, oh, that was way harder than I thought it would be. From Christiane Tetreault, there was some discussions relating to cost-saving measures for commercial property owners when renting to nonprofit arts organizations. Could you elaborate? What is the benefit for these property owners?
Depends on what the arrangement is, but you're, potentially paying rent in a otherwise empty space. Maybe it's not the full rent that would be there. You are, paying to keep the heat going. You're paying, I think it's that you're contributing in some way. And then I think in some instances, it's an image thing. It's not leaving a space empty. It really depends on the context. But I think part of that pitch is really just, if there's a site slated for redevelopment, but it's going to be sitting vacant for a year or two, it might be really hard for them to find someone who's going to pay the full lease cost. But maybe there's someone willing to just sort of do a pop-up. I can't help but think of like Spirit Halloween, but maybe better than that.
Dan, can I add on to that? It's
Yeah.
also the enhanced value of the asset.
Yeah.
I mean, if a developer has an asset and if it's sitting there, if it's new, something new, or if it's being sort of retrofitted for a future use, that asset seems to be active, and that keeps the value of that asset up. And I think this is the argument we hear from the developers here in Kitchener. It's better that if it's in a building, that the building is seen to be being used. And also it promotes businesses around the building as well. And so there's this valuation that works into it. And I know that plays well at this city level in Kitchener.
Yeah, it also plays well in policing because busy neighborhoods increase safety for everyone. So people like their neighborhoods busy for sure. I had an interesting question there about I should read it specifically. Do cities or communities provide virtual meanwhile spaces? Example, event software or that is not affordable or accessible to artists or small community organizations to broadcast across a region. I'm not sure if you guys have those resources, but
no, we're not doing anything in the digital space. I'll say that. honestly. Maybe there are some people there. There's definitely a digital media arts office at the city that does all kinds of really interesting creative projects. But I don't think, and there's also the Enterprise Toronto, which serves, does all kinds of interesting programs and supports for commercial businesses. So those would be two areas to scope out, but I'm not aware of any kind of, digital software sharing or
Not
platform.
either, and it would be the big guys who have those, like the Canadian opera companies and the national ballets, and yeah, the costs of those are real. So those are good things to think about as future advocacy directions. I'm gonna give us one more question here, and I think Bruce, this one's actually coming to you, and then we'll wrap up. So in KW, our current Meanwhile spaces are limited to a 3-month term, which is not so usable for many artists. Any tips for getting these time systems expanded? I'm sure you have not thought about this at all, Bruce. It's not a worry for you in the slightest.
In my 3 months here, so the main thing is getting the allowance by the developer or by the city to have that be a full-time. I know that it is a battle in the city of Waterloo with council to try to get approval for one of the buildings that we use, for it to be more long-term, because we realize this is one of the liabilities of Meanwhile spaces is knowing how long you have it for. And of course, we try to optimize the use as much as possible, but we realize for artists that having a very short truncated parcels of time does not help them as well. And the city realizes this as well. It's us keep trying to repeat the case for having longer periods of time. And I don't have a magic bullet for that. We're looking for it.
Yeah, fair enough. And Teresa had asked about if we have data about the outcomes of Meanwhile leases, activation metrics, economic impacts, community engagement numbers, case studies. The answer to that is that KW is just at the start of this. Toronto hasn't really done that. So I expect that Arts Build Ontario will have some metrics at the end. And I feel like I have something I have to help you with on that, Bruce. So
and we will have a report coming out, this Meanwhile Spaces project that we've been doing. We will be formally ending this project at the end of March, and we will have a report on all of the activities that have been done.
amazing. Thank you so much. And thanks to you guys for being here today. We hope you're leaving with some fresh insights and a sparked curiosity. The conversations were lively, so I really appreciate that. And the number of thoughts and ideas and the amount of sharing happening within the chat too was absolutely awesome. So we'll summarize some of that as well when we send things back out to help you out there. There's more to come, so keep an eye out for our next SPRE model, more case studies, and registration for more panels over the next few months. We have a very short survey. We're going to pop it up right now. If you can give us your feedback quick, like if we grab you now, then we get that feedback. We were talking about metrics and their value. These metrics are valuable for us too. So please answer the questions here. And we thank you for being a part of this conversation, and we will see you next time. Oh, great.
Thanks
People
for
are
having
answering,
us.
guys.
Thanks, everyone.
City of Mississauga says thank you. A bunch of individual artists, all kinds of great folks were with us today, providing us with resources and ideas too. So. Someone's asking where the survey is. It should have popped up on your screen right away. It should come up immediately. Oh, someone says that the survey closed. Maybe it ran out of time. It's still up on my screen. Interesting. All right, there we go. The survey's back up there if anybody's left who wants to answer anything. Right. So someone had indicated that they were on mobile and couldn't see the survey. I don't know if the surveys come up on mobile. I've never joined a Zoom webinar on mobile.